Hello everyone, my name is Brianna Reisinger, and today I'm going to talk to you about cell signaling and its relevance to everyday life. This presentation is going to give an overview on why cell signaling is so important in today's world and how it has evolved from past to present. Hello everyone, my name is Brianna Reisinger, and today Today, I'm going to break this presentation into multiple different parts. I'm going to begin by talking about the importance of cell signaling. I'm going to talk about where we started to where we are now and how this has evolved over the years. I am then going to go into the introduction to cell signaling and the basic mechanisms that we need to know as biology students to understand what is going on within cell signaling. I'm then going to talk about cell signaling and its importance specifically in modern and preventative medicine. We have developed very great drug therapies and treatments for diseases using cell signaling, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in this presentation, specifically using the HER2 receptor that is involved in breast cancer. I'm going to use this to talk about the application to the world and the drug therapy that we have created to the public that actually helps use the HER2 receptor and as a treatment for breast cancer. I am then going to talk about future resources available to look into the HER2 receptor and other drug therapies that we use today and give more information available on modern and preventative medicine. Cell signaling is an essential process that organisms use in order to respond to their environment. These responses are going to differ depending on the signals within the organism or body that are being sent, and these responses can actually create downstream effects and even more signaling within different cells. Cell signaling leads to crucial decisions at the cellular level. The most common of these include cell development, cell growth, cell division, cell differentiation, cell death, which is also called apoptosis, and much, much more. These decisions are crucial to the functioning of the body and the cell itself. We know that cell signaling mitigates decisions and many cellular malfunctions within the body. We know these to be many autoimmune disorders and many serious diseases in the health world and medical world today. When we look at where we began to where we are now, the differences are astonishing. We have built a basis for so many drug therapies and different items that have helped better our world just because of cell signaling. We know so much about apoptosis and other messengers and hormones and how they work, all because of everything that started, even back to the 1880s. In the 1880s specifically, we see Charles Darwin working with experiments, and we find this messenger called auxin. Auxin was something that he found in root tips of plants, and he didn't even know it to be a messenger at the time because back then we had no idea that cell signaling has began. From there, it builds, science builds, and we continued research, we continued finding these messengers, these receptors, the signals, the pathways, everything that transforms later into cell signaling. We see in 1905, Ernest Starling was the first person to use the word hormone, and he was able to explain that these hormones are the chemical messengers which spread from cell to cell along the bloodstream. From there, in the 1950s, we see downstream intracellular events started to unfold. These events led to more research, and more research leads to more information about more receptors, more signaling pathways, other forms of signaling pathways, and what this looks like. After the discovery of really what now we know to be messengers and receptors, we see signal transduction for the first time used in literature around the 1970s. From here, we were able to understand that signal transduction refers to the translation of an external signal into a cellular response. And being able to understand this and form the basis of what we have today has led us to know what cell signaling is and the ideals behind cell signaling and how much information it has given us in today's world. As I mentioned in the previous slide, we see that cell signaling refers to the translation of an external signal into a cellular response. These responses are obviously sent via signals, and signal transduction being the process of transferring a signal throughout an organism, especially across or throughout a cell. These processes for signal transduction rely on a majority of proteins, enzymes, and signaling molecules. When we look at cell signaling, we see the basis of having a receptor, to having a ligand, to having a response. And these responses can cause downstream effects that signal other cells and send out more signals, and these signals affect the cell even more. It's kind of a never-ending process that is guaranteed to continue. When we look at the 4 types of signaling molecules, these molecules are cell-to-cell signaling, endocrine signaling, paracrine signaling, and autocrine signaling. Each of these signals is different in every single way. They do different things, and they have different locations, different things that they do, and they involve different proteins and enzymes to make sure the signal gets to where it's supposed to go. When we see cell-to-cell signaling, we see transmembrane proteins on 2 different cells interacting with each other. An example of this would be integrins and cadherins proteins that are within the body. When we look at endocrine signaling, we see basically the idea of something being secreted into blood and acting out over a distance. When we think of stuff like this, it's, sex hormones, insulin, pituitary hormones, basically every kind of hormone that you can imagine. Endocrine means through the bloodstream, so this is the majority of where we see hormones. When we look at paracrine signaling, we see something acting locally on a neighboring cell. This would be an example of like a neurotransmitter or gases that are within the body. Paracrine is very great with communication, and we see this in a lot of neuronal signaling. When we look at autocrine, we see something being secreted as a signal which bounces back on itself, actually. And so these are the 4 different major types of signaling within the body. When we look at the terms of signaling and signaling molecules, we see that cells in our bodies actually work together to respond to changes in their environment, like we talked about in previous slides. Many signals are sent via proteins and enzymes to keep the body functioning. Disruptions to this signaling and these signaling molecules is pretty much a direct cause of many diseases and illnesses that we see today. We use medical research within cell signaling in order to try to investigate proteins that enable cell signaling and how these signals are turned on and off and why. We are trying to define pathways that trigger cell death, and we are trying to look at different reasons for why these things are happening. And the availability for us to look at these molecules and different proteins and enzymes and pathways is leading to incredible research in the past and the present. When we kind of look into the depth after the idea of a signal being sent out and looking at signaling molecules, we see the importance of receptors. These receptors can be intracellular or extracellular. Intracellular, obviously being within the cell, extracellular being on the outside of the cell. These receptors are specific for one or more ligands, and ligands are proteins that specifically bind to receptors and cause them to change shape, change conformation, which then leads to downstream effects within the inside of the cell that leads to even more signaling or more pathways down the road. The ability for receptors to be specific for more more than one ligand can cause obviously more than one signal at a time or more than one outcome. We see so many different types of receptors, and the plethora is kind of astonishing. I will be specifically talking about a receptor later on in this presentation. So when we look at the ability for ligands to bind to receptors, we see a change within the cell, and this change is what is able to influence other signaling molecules down the road. Many of these other molecules that are involved in a normal day function, and it's probably one of the most popular proteins that we hear about, are what are called kinases. Kinases have the incredible ability to have essentially an on and off switch. And this on and off switch is what is basically activation. And this activation is either on or off, and this activation can either be bad or good. And in a lot of cases, we see where there can be kinases that are actually stuck on and are causing overgrowth and overdevelopment of cells, and obviously leading to things that we know as cancer or tumors and stuff like that. The downstream effects that are caused by these kinases are incredible. Like I said, some are good and some are bad. The on position in a kinase is basically the ability for a phosphate to attach to a group of other molecules. So a phosphate would need to be added in order for these kinases to take place, and when this is not here, the receptor is not continuing. I could go on and on about all the molecules and receptors and different signaling pathways that are within the ideals of cell signaling, but the importance is basically to remember receptor to ligand to response. We see this pattern depending on different organisms, depending on different parts in the body, and all these receptors, ligands, or responses are different. We are going to see so many different things happening, and it's these downstream effects that basically make the body function. We see so many different ways that cell signaling has helped our world, and we actually have the ability to now take drugs and influence these cell signaling pathways. And I will begin talking about modern medicine in the next slide. When we look at cell signaling, specifically in modern and preventative medicine, we have done amazing things, and we are continuing to do amazing things. It is important to see that signal transduction and pharmacology provides the world with this wonderful opportunity to investigate the basis of human disease. It has helped us transform therapeutic strategies in order to help treat cancers, autoimmune diseases, cardiovascular issues and problems. We even see metabolic disorders being touched upon, and this is all having to do with us having a basis and understanding of cell signaling and how to target specific parts of cell signaling and pathways. We have a large array in today's society of different ways to target specific parts of cell signaling. We are not only looking at receptors now, we are now messing with specific ligands. We are trying to target specific portions intracellularly, extracellularly. We're even trying to create inhibitors that are going to block signals and take them away. We are creating so many amazing things, and our research is never ending, especially in the pharmaceutical companies. When looking at receptors and how to target them in cell signaling, I earlier briefly talked about kinase receptors in the introduction to cell signaling slide, but now I wanted to tell everyone about G protein coupled receptors, or what we know as GPCRs. GPCRs are usually the first thing you read about when you read cell signaling in any biology book or pretty much any cell biology class you take. This is because they have so many different functions, and there are so many different ones in the human body. There's actually 1,000 different GPCRs just in the human body alone, and all of these different receptors are highly specific to certain signals, and all of these signals have specific ligands and different downstream effects and different functions that they give to the body. They are the most diverse group of membrane receptors in eukaryotic cells. And the plethora of functions that they have within the body has led to the research we have today. In fact, the research we have on these receptors alone has affected medicine more than pretty much any other receptor you read about. And it is estimated that 1/3 to 1/2 of all marketed drugs act by binding to GPCRs. And that is because they're so readily used in our body and available. And we've done so much research on them. And we see what they do. They receive from the environment all the energy, the light sources, sugars, peptides, lipids, and proteins, which is obviously a plethora in our bodies. These proteins are essential to modern medicine and have led us to amazing discoveries. And they continue every day to do this. And we will continue to see this probably for a very, very long time. And I can't wait to see all the new research that will become available in the next few years. In the next slide, I'm going to give a specific example of a drug that is on the market that is actually supposed to be a preventative medicine and treatment for breast cancer. I'm going to talk about the specific receptor, what it is, how it functions, and the treatment that it is following to help treat breast cancer. The HER2 receptor within the human body is what is specifically known as a receptor protein tyrosine kinase. This receptor is directly linked to intracellular enzymes and most commonly binds to polypeptide growth factors. And from what we know about growth factors, we know that when these things in this type of receptor is altered or has dysfunction or mutates, we normally see uncontrollable cell growth, cell division, which is what we know as cancer. And in the human body, the HER2 receptor is actually the receptor that is involved with breast cancer in women. And this receptor actually lives in multiple different tissues, but is most commonly seen on the epithelial tissue of breasts. Trastuzumab is the current drug on the market that is specifically targeting the HER2 receptor and trying to be a treatment for breast cancer in women. This drug is also called Herceptin. I am probably going to use the word Herceptin for the rest of the presentation just because it is much easier to pronounce and say. Herceptin is a monoclonal antibody that is generated to target HER2 receptor proteins. This drug has the ability to block the intracellular signal, and it binds extracellularly. Herceptin binding extracellularly causes all of the changes on the inside of the cell. It prevents dimerization, and it also makes sure that phosphorylation cannot happen intracellularly. The ability for this to happen is basically that Herceptin has the ability to attenuate the signal transduction downstream, which helps promote apoptosis and also helps stop cell proliferation, that cell growth and that cell division we see, which is what obviously leads to the tumor and breast cancer in women. By Herceptin promoting apoptosis and stopping this cell growth and division, we actually see the immune system trying to take place. This drug is specifically trying to create what we know as an immune-targeted therapy. This is what the meaning of the actual Herceptin is called. Basically, Herceptin is working to try to get the body's own immune system to kill these cancerous cells and stop the cell division and growth. That way the body can re-regulate and we don't see these growth factors taking place. We don't see the oversensitivity within the hormones. Herceptin's ability to bind extracellularly to this HER2 receptor to stop the intracellular downstream network is so cool. I am astonished that it has the ability to keep these signals from getting downstream to cause the proliferation that we are seeing with breast cancer. The fact that it is an immune-targeted therapy and that it's trying to use your own body to target the cancer is awesome. This drug on the market is actually providing great statistics and research and is working very well for a cancer treatment. It is something so cool and something that we don't get to see very often in today's age, and being able to see a cancer treatment on the market that is providing very good numbers is pretty great. And just like any other drug, pretty much any time any symptom pops up, this has to be known as a side effect. And with this drug, we are seeing people older, people with already previous heart issues. It is causing some heart issues or cardiovascular dysfunction in later years. So that's something that they are watching and paying attention to. But other than that, the HER2 receptor and its ability for what it's doing and helping try to prevent breast cancer in the very early stages is very, very awesome. I really hope you guys loved hearing about this. I'm going to put more information on the HER2 receptor and Herceptin in the next slide and give you guys some really good resources and more information available for you to read. In this slide, I've provided everyone 4 different articles and research on the HER2 and Herceptin drug treatment for breast cancer. The first one is actually from the drug itself. It gives a brief description as well as a brief mechanism of what's going on and gives a really great visual. There's quite a few images in that one. It's a lot less light of reading, briefly goes over what's going on, and then it also gives the statistics of the drug and specific facts about Herceptin itself. The second and the fourth article are actually more of journals, and they're definitely a little bit more difficult to read, have a lot of that fancy grammar, but they're very informative and have amazing information specifically about the mechanisms, how they work, and about Herceptin and HER2 and what is going on specifically in different domains and about all the receptors. It pretty much gives any kind of research that you can look at. And then the third is specifically talking about breast cancer and the treatment behind Herceptin and how it's helping, and gives information and statistics about this as well. I hope you all enjoyed my presentation. I absolutely loved being able to share my knowledge with everybody on the importance of cell signaling in today's world and why cell signaling is so important to us.